Okay, we are recording. Jake, the floor is yours.
Great. Thank you, Val. So wanted to thank the Chamber for letting me come on and speak on a few items. So I am Jake Vandewater. I'm the Vice President of Engineering Operations and IT with SDN Communications based out of Sioux Falls. My role here is really to help guide the technical teams of SDN with the planning and operations of our network. So for today's agenda, we're really going to focus on some things that SDN is seeing on the current landscape as it relates to cyber threats, as well as network utilization, as we've all kind of been seeing and kind of working into this remote worker scenario of working from home. And then normally we would kind of talk about items to prepare you going into that type of situation. So we're just going to talk about a few checklist items you can look at as you're getting settled in at home, hopefully by now. And then from there, we'll move into those cybersecurity tips, a couple areas to be on the lookout for, starting with what's known as business email compromise, moving into ransomware infections, and then the final topic being video conferencing, which has become a little more of a prominent activity with us in this situation, and then leave you with just a few final tips of kind of best practices as it relates to some cybersecurity items. So SDN Communications we're located here in Sioux Falls. We have our corporate offices as well as we have a data center here in Sioux Falls. We are owned by the 17 independent phone companies of the state of South Dakota, along with the partnership of our members. Our network, SDN, covers over 80% of the geography of the state of South Dakota. What that means is we are a business-to-business broadband service provider, so we can provide connectivity via our over 45,000 miles of fiber miles that include SDN network as well as that membership. So you'll see those phone companies listed off to the right of the screen. In addition to the South Dakota membership, we also have a partnership with independent phone companies in Minnesota, southern portion of Minnesota, as well as northern part of Iowa. So via SDN's network, we can really connect you anywhere directly in the state of South Dakota, the neighboring states, and then we get to key areas like Denver, Omaha, Minneapolis, Chicago, areas where there's key tier 1 providers as well as content providers. So we can help, and we do help a number of entities do that. When it comes to who we serve, SDN, you may not always think of us as a critical services provider, but that's really how we view ourselves and how we operate our business. So some of the industries that we work with include healthcare, 911 public service answering points, as well as the financial industry, and then the wireless cell phone industry as well. In addition to those, we're involved with educational entities, manufacturing, government, state government, and then agriculture. So when you're doing those bank transactions, you're making that cell phone call, isn't always SDN that you're thinking you're leveraging or you're relying on, but really through the reliability of our network, the security of our network, we're helping make sure those transactions take place, making sure those cell phone calls take place, and really being a support for those businesses. So when it comes to the current landscape, nationwide, Cloudflare.com is seeing the internet use is up 17% as we've migrated into this work remote situation. Along with network utilization, the cyber threats are up as well. So specifically on hacking and phishing attempts overall, just moving from February into March, greater than 37% increase in that activity. And then phishing specifically, since the end of February, has seen a rise of 600%. And that really comes in the form of just traditional impersonation scams, the business email compromise, which we're going to talk about, and then just regular extortion attacks. And a lot of that is attributed to just recreational hackers. Sometimes they're called script kiddies, just people with a little bit of expertise in cybersecurity and cyber threats. They've got more time on their hands. They're spending more time in front of a computer. They have internet access, and they're just kind of dabbling in this a little further. Beyond that, the more professional cyber criminals are also using this as a time to kind of further their own agendas, and that's really because we're in a target-rich environment for them, to where we've transitioned. There's a lot more people online. We're in a little bit different scenario, so there's a little bit of discomfort, and they're leveraging that to their advantage. On the network piece, specifically SDN's network, we kind of look at it as a year-over-year growth pattern. And from first quarter of last year, you'll see we kind of started out there on the left of that graph. We see a little bit of dip in activity as we go into that summertime, and then as we progress into the cooler months, and then into the first quarter of this year, seeing an overall growth of 39% of just our internet growth. So as we're planning our network, we're really looking at things like this. So going into next year, we'll plan for a similar increase in overall network utilization. So some of the big questions that came up as we were preparing, we being SDN, we as a society, to work remote was, is the network ready? You know, having all these people using their home internet connections, is the connectivity going to be ready? And so SDN is a business provider, but we are connecting service providers. So we are connecting those entities that provide the connections for our residences. And so the daytime pattern has shifted to where we've seen a 50 gig per second increase of the traffic in that 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. window starting March 16th, when really the majority of people in this area started working remote. And we haven't seen that decrease. Now, that is just in the 8 to 5. We also see growth beyond that, but not as significant, beyond that being after that 5 p.m. Now, looking back at our network over the last 3 years, a year-over-year increase has usually been about that 30%. So from first quarter of 2019 to the first part of this year, we saw that 39% increase. And one of the key aspects of that is of course the pandemic that we're going through. But in addition to that, we saw an all-time peak of our network in early April. And so I'm certainly seeing the further utilization of home internet connections and the network in general. And we're anxious to see what the summer will bring, if we'll still have that typical 7% drop, as I'm sure there's a lot of people that are just anxious to get to be outside and not have to worry about kind of being cooped up. So beyond the landscape, wanted to really touch on those items that you can evaluate to make sure that your work from home setup, your work remote setup is really set up for success. And so the first part of that being your internet connection. So working with your internet provider to make sure that you have the right speed, the right capacity to do the work you're planning or currently are trying to do. And so the steps to do that are really get an idea of what your speed is. You can you can Google a speed test site, go to that site and run it, or you can work with your provider. Now, once you have those results, confirm with your provider your plan, and then evaluate what needs are going to take place in your home. The work that needs to be done for your business, plus typically there's going to be other usage going on as well from other family members that may include some streaming or some school activity as well. So plan for that capacity, plan for that growth. Moving a little further into the network beyond just the service provider connection, taking a look at your home router. So your home router is really the gateway to your network. If that device were to be compromised, that would really open things up and allow that hacker to access a variety of other devices in your home. So the first step in securing that is really making sure the right software updates are in place on the device and making sure nothing is turned on like a remote management to where it would allow somebody to potentially access and take control of that. And then if you're utilizing wireless, making sure you have the right encryption. So encryption is a security measure. So as you connect from your smartphone or from your laptop wirelessly back to your router, that wireless stream is encrypted between those devices, and there's no potential for snooping or over-the-air kind of deception of that data. A little closer into the network from the router then is your computer. So the first thing, if you're conducting business from home, you're connecting back to a corporate office, making sure you have a VPN, a virtual private network. This will allow the communications between your computer and your office to all be secure, encrypted, and then you'll be able to access a lot of those systems that may reside back at the office on that network. From there, making sure you're using strong passwords. Strong passwords are a good key, a simple thing to to put in place, and making sure you have that on your machine, on your VPN as well. And then moving from there, software updates. These don't only apply to your operating system, but also the applications as well. The reason for software updates are because something was exposed, there was a threat out there, and those software updates are patching. So make sure the patching gets complete. And then encryption, an option for encryption really, if you're going to be sending files to someone and there may be sensitive files because you're not in the office, you're having to do this remote communication, be able to encrypt and password protect that file and send it to someone. And then on the other side, they can use a password or a token to decrypt that and utilize the file and have that secure in the transmission. And then generally just making sure that on your work, your business computer, that you're focusing on business applications. You're not downloading, software that's unnecessary, utilizing games for kids or having them conduct other, non-business functions on there. Just focus on the business work. And then the next one is a rather simple one, and you may ask yourself, why does it apply? Since I'm at home, I'm at my house, but locking the device. So it's really basic, but regardless of if someone has malicious intent or not, just lock the device. Don't worry about maybe the kids mistakenly doing something or deleting something, or a roommate or somebody visiting thinks they can get on and just use the machine because it's unlocked. The next one, offline backup. So this we'll talk a little more about later as we get into some of the threats that are out there, but it's just a good idea to have a good quality regular backup of your machine in the event something happens and you need to restore from that. And finally, the one of the best policies is really just follow your employer's security practices and security policies. Treat being in your home office and your work remote situation similar to how you would in the office. Making sure you're following those policies and letting them apply as you're conducting your business remotely. So as you're on the lookout and you're preparing the situation, some things that are a little more prominent right now and occurring, the first being phishing attempts. So specifically business email compromise, and then the next being ransomware attacks. And then finally, we're going to talk about video conferencing. So business email compromise is really the act of a phishing email and impersonation. So the attackers are using social engineering to really deceive you and manipulate you into giving some sort of confidential personal information, maybe financial details, so that they can leverage that for their gain. So they're using that phishing email to really set the stage and to get you kind of trusting them and thinking they are somebody else, they're impersonating themselves as someone else. And so you send that over and then really open the door for them to get that data. So when it comes to phishing emails, the best thing to do is really, be cautious. Question the emails as they come through, and I'll just have a few kind of potential red flags to keep an eye out for that indicate that maybe something will be wrong or something is wrong with the email. The first is look for spelling errors. I know, plenty of us don't use spell check and make some errors, but if there's some habitual misspelled words in this, along with some of the other red flags, it's a pretty good indicator that something might be wrong with that email, and they're not who they say they are. The next being, is it urgent? Is there language in there that's saying you must act now, I need an immediate response? Almost feels like it's coming off in a threatening manner. Pretty good chance it's a phishing email as you link it to some of these others. Verify links. So there may be a hyperlink to where it's in blue, it's underlined. You can hover over that and really see what that website may be. Be very diligent in doing so, because it's certainly possible that maybe an N was changed to an R. There's things misspelled. It looks like Microsoft, but it's SFT, it's not SOFT.com. And so making sure you're reviewing those and they are truly legitimate. And then checking the from address. So it's easy to look at those and say you can change the name, but the address may be something different. It may be a name you recognize, but the email is not the email of that person. And then the final step is really, what are they asking for? If they're asking for personally identifiable information, usernames, passwords, certainly question that and don't readily offer that back to them. This slide here is really just a representation of those those red flags. So you see at the top here, a very, we say not valid, it's a very generic email address. So log on at itdepartment.com. Have an idea of who you're dealing with, have some specifics. Don't believe it if it's really just kind of a general email address. And then the first paragraph here, you'll see some spelling errors. They spelled previous wrong, they spelled server wrong. And then going on from there, they're asking for usernames and passwords. So certainly those red flags start indicating that something is wrong with this email. And then finally, really that threatening language and that urgency of they're going to suspend the account if there's not a confirmation of those details above now. And then finally, tying back to that email address, they're saying very generic and who it's signed from, so you don't know who you're dealing with. So you need to be cautious of these items. Specifically with the COVID-19 activity going right now, the FBI released a flash alert last week, really warning of a rise in the amount of phishing attempts related to the COVID-19 activity. And so what's happening is emails are being sent out, and either the subject line or an attachment or some other piece of that email is piquing interest related to COVID-19. And this may be an attachment that says, details surrounding COVID-19 PPE or infection list. And then when that attachment is opened, it really executes a file or a macro that allows the attacker to then remotely connect to that machine and exploit it for their use. That may be accessing files or using it to really snoop on you. Really, that's enabling the camera, enabling the microphone, or using it to try and pivot into other machines that you have connected, whether it be on your corporate network or on your home network. So it's not really confirmed just yet what the whole details of those attachments are, but the FBI has really asked that the best step, do not open the attachment, and then if you do receive the email, report it to FBI or your local law enforcement. So specifically on business email compromise, the key thing here is they're trying to leverage impersonation. And so you'll see this example email here. Vernon Brown, our Vice President of Marketing and Community Relations, represents themselves as him on this. And so this was actually sent to one of our employees at SDN, and really just asking, the request is that this payment gets set up for a vendor. And it's trying to set the stage to really get a payment to the attacker. Fortunately, our employee flagged this as a potential phishing alert, and our IT department was able to investigate it further. Similarly, with another employee, received an email which was supposed to be represented as from our CEO, Mark Shalana. As you can see by the email address there, it's an AOL.com email, which is not Mark's email. And so one of the red flags stuck out, and we were able to flag it. The next one being from our Vice President of Sales, supposedly Ryan Punt. Once again, an email.com address. It's not Ryan's email, but this one could certainly have created some impact for Ryan, whereas the request was changing the payroll information. Went to one of our accounting individuals, and luckily they kind of were trained and knew what things to look for as far as to spot a phishing email, and they flagged this one and stopped any further impact. And so normally, if they were successful, the next steps would be sending some files, getting that account information, and then rerouting that money to their own account. The next one here was just sent to one of our distribution groups with our marketing team. And so there's a link in here. This link is to a file, and typically what happened is download that file, and then there's some sort of exploitation that would take place, and they would have access into that. Certainly tempting to where, as marketing is reviewing documents, they're getting new brochures, new marketing material, trying to tempt them to open that and think it's something of value for them to look at. This final one here is actually kind of an entertaining one. So our CEO actually sent this out. Chris Isles, one of our sales engineers, saw this, saw kind of the basic language in an attachment, and just thought it was really odd coming from Mark. And so he flagged it as a potential phishing alert. The interesting thing is that this is actually a legitimate email. Mark really did send this out to a number of us, but that's okay that it got flagged. It's better to be safe than sorry. And there are going to be moments where some of the red flags come through, and it looks to be a phishing alert. I personally have flagged a few, and usually I flag them and send them over to our IT group, and they say, no, you have to do that email, you have to handle that email. But knowing those indicators, and there are going to be some that maybe they have to resend the email or do a phone call saying, hey, didn't you get that email? But it's going to help us be more effective in catching the actual phishing attempts that come through. So going on the defense side, really the tips for business email compromise. First is confirming that email address. Don't publish all your email addresses publicly on social media, etc., so that the attackers can easily find them. If they don't have that email address, they're not going to be able to send that email, so it doesn't happen. It doesn't impact you. And then the next being, ask yourself, were you expecting that? If it was an unexpected email, somebody's asking for some urgent items, pick up the phone, call, verify the legitimacy of that request. Certainly, if it's someone you didn't know, someone you aren't dealing with normally, certainly call and try and verify their data. And then additionally on that urgency, just take a quick time out, take a breath, verify the details of that, make a couple phone calls, visit with people. Don't get pressured into making a quick kind of misinformed response on that could have greater impact to your organization. And then finally, if an email were to be sent from the CFO to one of his payroll representatives, asking for a payment or demanding a payment, and he simply says, he's not available, just make the payment, it's certainly on that employee to really make the right call. They should treat protecting the company as their highest priority. It's okay to wait until that person's available, call that person, step into a meeting and interrupt them to verify that, to do their due diligence on protecting the company as part of their job. So moving on from business email compromise, the next item I wanted to talk about is really ransomware. So ransomware is simply malware. It's an infection that is downloaded on your computer. After it's downloaded and it's executed, files are encrypted. And so those files are encrypted, and you won't have the key as the user of that computer. So without that key, what happens is you'll actually not be able to use your computer. A message will be presented to you demanding a payment. And so it demands that payment, and it has a timer. And that timer, you are required to pay, or else the amount of money will increase. You will be unable to access those files until something else further is done. And so from there, the hackers are going to ask you to pay in Bitcoin. And the reason for Bitcoin is it's a cryptocurrency. The cryptocurrency allows them to remain anonymous and not get the activity, the cyber threat tracked back to them. So when it comes to the ransomware, it's simply your information is being held hostage. They're not going to give you access back to that until it's paid. But the catch being, there's no guarantee that you're going to get your data back. So you could pay and you could still never see that data. So when we mentioned early on the need for the offline backup, the reason for that is if you're able to access an offline backup, even if it's a couple of days or a week old, then you're able to say, okay, without paying that ransom, here's the cost to me to run my business to retrieve that data. And so ransom attacks are on the rise, and they're anticipating a $20 billion cost related to ransomware. And that cost is really not only the ransom, but it's also the work associated with recovery. So it's hardware recovery, data recovery, which really, at the end of the day, the best method kind of comes back to a lot of recreating the data. But when it comes specifically to small businesses, 55% of them are paying the ransom. If you talk to the FBI, they will say that is the last resort they want you to do, is to actually pay the ransom, simply because there's no guarantee that you're going to get your data back. So the best defense, the first one being, when it comes to email, it's the same as business email compromise. Question the legitimacy of that email. Don't click on links. Don't download files. Question if you didn't expect them, question the legitimacy of them. Have your IT department scan those and make sure they're safe files to access. And then the next being careful about the websites you visit. going to an infected website could certainly expose you to ransomware and a download. And so as those come up, make sure it's a legitimate website. And then finally, don't download free apps. There are a lot of good open source tools out there, but simply make sure it's vetted by your IT department and it's a legitimate app that's not going to create further impact to you and your business. The next is video conferencing. So this one has become more and more prominent as we've moved into this work from home environment. And so what's happening is what's being referred to as Zoom bombing. So users are gaining access to some of these video conferencing meetings, and then it's really a harassment of the participants. It's creating enough disruption to where they can't really use that meeting session. A variety of impacts have happened. Additionally, going from there, Zoom specifically, the Department of Homeland Security issued a warning. There's a couple of zero-day exploits that have been offered for sale, specifically targeting or about Zoom, for sale for $500,000. And what these will do is once it will allow a hacker to gain access to the meetings, and from those meetings, they'll be able to actually use some remote code execution and gain access to some of the participants' machines. And so they'll be able to access those machines, they'll be able to leverage that data, use that against you and use it for their gain. So Zoom is a legitimate company. It's headquartered in the United States. The main application was actually developed by companies in China. So there's been a lot of questions in regards to the security. Now, the utilization of Zoom has grown over 20-fold simply because of this COVID-19 crisis that we're in. Zoom has done a number of security updates that many security experts are applauding simply because they've responded well to a lot of these. And simply on the Zoom bombing piece, they put in some items, and really these apply regardless if you're using Zoom or another remote meeting type application. So the first of those being avoid publicly sharing those meeting links. Don't make it easily available on social media. You'll get a room ID, you'll have the link. So don't overshare that, and then utilize passwords in conjunction with that meeting ID so that when people connect, just like when you connected this meeting today, you had to put in a password. It doesn't have to be overly complex, but just a secondary verification that you should be a participant in that meeting. And then there's also an option that you can utilize. This is a good practice called waiting room. So you connect to the meeting and then you're not allowed officially into the meeting until the administrator of that meeting grants you access. Just limits the limits any unnecessary or unapproved attendees that may guess passwords and get around those other measures. And then finally, just limit screen sharing to the presenter or to the host. So not everybody can have that function and share non-meeting content and disrupt the meeting. Kind of moving into the other prevention items, just a few final things I wanted to leave you with today. The first is really curating strong passwords. So these don't always have to mean complexity. Complexity, the length is grown to be more and more of an important item. So over the last year, SDN Communications partnered with Dakota State University and did some assessment of our passwords internally. And the response that Dakota State offered us was that if our passwords were 18 plus characters, in that 18 to 20 range, there's little to no chance that they would have ever cracked those, simply because reaching that length right now, there's not a lot of efficiency, and it takes a significant amount of time invested to really crack those. And so you start extending that length with some of these complexities, and you have yourself a really solid password. The next piece, still on passwords, is don't use common or obvious passwords. So if there was a password maybe used in the past and you're simply appending maybe the year onto it, or if you're changing your passwords quarterly and you go from spring 2020 to summer 2020, hackers will start to notice those patterns. And as they're developing their tools to really test these passwords and try things to get into your network, they're going to pick out a lot of these common trends. If it's a trend or a pattern on the keyboard, they've got those. If it's just a year or something with your last name with the year or kid's name, they're getting a lot of those common terms. So start coming up with a little more complex, a little longer, if you need to, use a password management tool. So at the end of the day, if you simply have to only remember 2 different passwords, one to get on your machine and one to get into your password management tool, great, because then that password management tool will help not only remember the passwords, but also help you recycle and come up with complex, good passwords for the various, whether it's cloud services or vendor management tools, just third-party systems that you have to access. The next being multi-factor authentication. So along with your password, if you're connecting to your machine, make sure there's either a text message token that gets sent or an app on your phone to where you can get a prompt once you log on that before you're granted full network access or full connectivity, you're presented with that secondary option. You can grant there and then be in. This has actually proved helpful for SDN through some assessments we've done, to where we've had the assessors have had a successful breach into our network, and the last line of defense was the multi-factor. Once the multi-factor, it really caused us to, it was another means of alerting us that something was happening with our network. And then the final one I would leave you with today is simply securing your Wi-Fi. We've been hearing about this one for years, and it's a basic one. Just simply making sure that not only the password, but if you're going to be giving out, having set up, whether it's friends of family, kids coming over and utilizing your Wi-Fi, look at having that guest segment of your network set up with a separate password so that that doesn't get overly shared and out there and exposed. But those are the items I had planned on presenting to the group, and I hope they provided you with some useful information, and certainly open it up for questions if anybody has any.
We would definitely appreciate it if anybody did have questions. Please use the chat feature. You can see that there is a little 2 people and it says 50 next to it, and then there's a chat bubble. So please use that chat bubble to get your questions answered. So please feel free to start putting those in. And it looks like we got one already. So.
Yeah, so Lori's question was, what password management tool do you recommend? There's a couple good ones out there. One that we've had really good success with is LastPass. It's a paid enterprise level. You can share, you can create different groups, and we've had a lot of luck with that one. Jackie asked, can you extrapolate on the guest feature, please? And so I'm assuming this is back on the guest Wi-Fi. So with a lot of just home, most Wi-Fi routers, wireless routers today, you can set up just simply a guest network, and it will segment that out, and it'll be a separate SSID broadcast name, a separate password, and allow you to really keep that segmented and different from the rest of your network. Karen asked, how do I know my router has all the appropriate software updates? Depending on the router, you may be able to log into your router, and it may be as simple as actually clicking check software updates. I know some of the models like Netgear offer that, to where it will connect to their cloud server and tell you, yes, I have the latest, or no, I don't. Some maybe older models or different vendors, it may be a little more complex, where as long as you find the vendor and the model number, which is usually available on the bottom of the device on a sticker, you can just go to their website. They usually have a support section, and you can check there for the version, contact their support, and a lot of times they'll help walk you through just downloading that file and applying it to your router. Alan offered up, check out Bitwarden, open source, costs a bit less than LastPass, can either use their cloud or set up your own enterprise cloud. So another password management tool, Bitwarden, for those looking for that type of tool. Rob Swinson asked, is Wi-Fi typically secured as a default setting on home systems, or does that typically have to be done manually? So normally, I would say, in earlier years, it was usually a manual setting. A lot of them now are really taking you through the setup as part of their basic setup, to where you have to apply some sort of security. So a lot of times now, as we've been talking about the need for a password and secure wireless setups, vendors have responded to where it will take you through more of that through the manual setup of it. Alan says, do you have a go-to email to email, E2E email service? Tutanota here, but Proton is good too. You know, Alan, I don't really have a recommendation on there. But certainly, if you were on and would be willing to unmute, I think we would certainly open it up if you wanted to offer maybe some more detail on your options you offered there.
I did click unmute, so you should be able to unmute yourself, Alan, if you do, if you would like to speak.
He said 1 sec, so I'll real quick here jump. Oh, do we have Alan there?
I'm here. You got me now?
Yeah, go ahead, Alan. If you wanted to kind of talk on the email items, we'd certainly welcome that.
Oh yeah, I especially these days when working with new clients and handling sensitive information, try to use end encryption. And I was just wondering if you had any particular services you liked. I like Tutanova. It's offshore hosted, and they use top level encryption, so we can get passwords and stuff without having it sit in Gmail or Outlook servers.
Yeah, we've tried to leverage, you know, the Office 365 a little more. You know, we at SDN explored a little more on the email encryption. We had turned on some stuff with Sophos a few years ago. We still use Sophos for other items, but specifically on the encryption, really haven't leveraged it to its full potential, I would say.
Yeah, and I see Karen asked about encrypting single emails. That's part of what I use Tutanota for. I have my own account. If I need to send a secure email to you, I can just communicate an agreed upon password ahead of time. I send that email to your primary inbox. It gives you a link, and then you can use our prior discussed password to open that email and then communicate back and forth with me, and it's all end-to-end encrypted.
Great. Thank you for offering that, Alan.
Thanks for hosting.
So I'm just going back through some of our questions here. So Merlin says, many ISPs provide routers/modems. Does a VPN provide requisite security for home network computers with an ISP provided router? So it depends, Merlin, on the setup of your VPN. Like my VPN at home is simply a client that I run on my PC. So it's really a standalone device. There's certain solutions out there. SCN, we offer what we call a managed firewall. That is its kind of simplest offering is a VPN endpoint, if you will. So it could be placed in the, you know, next to that router is kind of a VPN, and then everything behind it would have that connectivity. You would just have to adjust the policies as to what would be allowed to really go over that VPN connection. Lori says, you suggest that email passwords should not be published on company websites. Well, email addresses, and she said, we are in sales, so potential customers need to have that information. That's a very good point, and I would say limit it, maybe some of those mass distribution lists so that they don't hit a variety of people. Certainly, you're going to have that communication from people outside your organization, but certainly, I would encourage kind of upping the training and the education for your sales staff to just be able to spot those phishing emails and potential threats that might be coming through in that fashion. You know, it's pretty difficult for somebody who works in sales to not explore and investigate maybe a spreadsheet if it's talking sales leads or potential client details. But have an option where you can maybe sandbox that and have a test if there's an attachment or some of those items. So that you do have an IT group that can kind of safely scan those and verify if they are safe to work with or not. Nick says, with a home router, is there usually a period of time that they are good for. How often should you be investing in a new router for our homes? So, usually I would say that 3 to 5 year is a good rule of thumb when you start looking at technology. Simply hardware, it's getting heavily used, and really just the feature set that grows. So, a lot of times these vendors are only going to support a device. They're going to have that planned obsolescence with that, so that they can roll out new models, new feature sets, new costs potentially, but just plan for probably every 3 to 5 years. You're probably going to have to upgrade, and there's going to be better options, and with those will come better performance and better security for you. Robert says, you mentioned LastPass as a password manager. Is this the one which originated in Switzerland? I'm not 100% sure on that, Robert. I would have to do some investigation to verify. I didn't think that one started in Switzerland. Jack says, do you have a recommendation to make sure cell phones have proper protection, since many new apps are being used to access meetings, etc.? Great point. The updates is the first piece of that. There are some mobile devices, device management tools. I believe VMware has one to where from a corporate level, you can kind of manage the applications. So you can test the applications, make sure they are secure applications, and then really have your IT group kind of push those through and manage those via that app. So rather than going directly to download the Outlook app on your phone, you would go through your IT's kind of vetted out version, and then they could manage the version and the information. That was all of the questions in the chat that we had.
Okay, if anybody else has any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. I am recording this. I will be processing that, and I will be sending out 2 emails just because of the large capacity of the recording. First, you will get a PDF of the presentation that is provided, and then you will also get an email with this actual recording. So if you guys do have any questions, please feel free to get a hold of us, and we'll go ahead and try to get those answered. Again, thank you so much for joining us for our Business Sense workshop series. We have plenty of different workshops that are coming up, so please feel free to check out our website that has a bunch of other workshops going on. So thank you so much. Jake, do you have anything else to say at all?
No, certainly, reach out to SDN if there's anything we can help with further. Any further questions that may come up, certainly send them our way, and thanks for letting us do this.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much, everybody. I'm going to go ahead and stop the